is when we disagree with somebody, or when better to look at it from when somebody disagrees with us, when somebody makes us feel like we got it wrong, or particularly if it's on a topic that really matters to us, we don't like that feeling. And that feeling is often described as what's called cognitive dissonance. A lot of people think cognitive dissonance is anytime anybody holds two competing thoughts, and it is similar to that, but it's slightly different. It's what it really is we recognize the contradiction between two thoughts. So you can easily hold two thoughts. This is just a tip for anybody who wants to call cognitive dissonance sometimes, because I see a lot of people talking about it on the net, and a lot of the time they've got it wrong, where they're like, oh, if you're, you hold this one view that you should treat animals well, and you also consume animals for their flesh, that's cognitive dissonance. It's not. It's absolutely not. It's what it would be is pointing that out to somebody causes what's called cognitive dissonance, and that is, that feeling of being like, oh, I got that one wrong, or it sounded like the discussion I heard just before coming in from the last session on life advice was I only heard part of it, but it sounded like somebody who was dealing with a lot of guilt about something that they'd done. Is that right?
Yeah, it seems like it.
Yeah. So that guilt would be a bit of cognitive dissonance. It's anything that you don't like. It's like thoughts have feelings attached to them. Any thought where we don't like the feeling behind that is going to cause cognitive dissonance. The most common ways we feel it are getting stuff wrong. So when we are adamantly believe something and we sort of shout it from the rooftops. For me, my one was I was a 9/11 truther for quite a while. I thought that the 9/11 was an inside job, and coming out of that, turning around to people and saying, I don't think that anymore, and going through the process of not thinking that anymore, that causes a lot of cognitive dissonance. The challenge with cognitive dissonance is it can make us feel it can stick us in our ways, because to go from one belief to another causes dissonance. So what we typically do is rebound back into the belief we've got. In fact, we can strengthen it, which is something that Leon Festinger called the backfire effect. So very strong disconfirming evidence of any case can actually strengthen our resolve in what was just disconfirmed, because the dissonance behind going, oh my goodness, my whole life I've been making mistakes and I'm silly and I don't get this and other people are smarter than me. All of those thoughts cause such dissonance that it's easier in some ways to resolve it by going, no, I'm definitely right. This, cult leader I'm following is definitely the one true savior, or something like that. So what we're going to do in this as an exercise is something I do in workshops. I run workshops for corporates. A lot of it is on how to speak to people, how to persuade people. And the goal in this game is just to agree with your interlocutor. So what I will invite the audience to do now is, if you hold a deep conviction on a topic, to put that position really clearly stated in the ask to speak channel. So when I say really clearly stated, I mean, we had some discussions last time about abortion. It could be, I believe abortion is wrong. That could be clearly stated. Or we could talk about veganism, eating meat, political stuff. It really doesn't matter what the topic is. The main job, once you're defending that position, is how can you agree with people that are disagreeing with you? So we're going to have a bit of a sort of peanut gallery here of people. We'll invite, if the mods can, if Block or Corvo can help me with this, we might invite have 3 or 4 people up here at once, and we can all be peppering the speaker with challenges, even insults, humorously misunderstanding them, challenging their facts. We don't have to disagree with them to do so, and we don't have to use the rules to do so. We can just have fun. And the speaker's job is to take our points and find a way where they can agree with them. So they've got to use it's really simple. The idea is use yes and rather than yeah but. But is the word we're listening out for. So if you're listening in to this and you're not speaking, but you hear someone say but, feel free to spam the chat with that and say, I caught him saying but. Because it can be interesting how difficult it is to stop doing that, and you can help us sort of catch somebody at it. And then we'll have bits where we'll debrief and talk a bit about, what's the effect of this? How does this work for you? How would this?
Right. I'm going to tap out, but Block will assist you in this.
Fantastic. Okay. Thanks, Corvo.
Yeah, I got you.
Cheers, Block. G'day, Block.
Hi.
Hi there. So do you get the idea of the game, Block?
Yeah, I think we played this the last time, and it was
Yeah.
really interesting for sure.
What was interesting about it?
It's a really difficult game because it like challenges your human nature to want to be right.
Yeah, it
It's
does.
difficult.
It's what it challenges is your human nature to be right at the same time as someone else, because you can still be right. That's some of the beauty of it. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's I just used a word but there. So Lazarus has asked a great question. What about similar words such as although and unless? Exactly the same thing. A lot of people end up switching it out for however or on the other hand. The idea is to just honestly use the word and. We had a great example yesterday with where, oh goodness, what was it being talked about? It was some very touchy topic. There was another one. I was arguing for abolishing or reducing intellectual property so that you only hold it for a few years. And someone was saying, well, what if that means that artists aren't getting paid? And I was like, yeah, it's important artists get paid.
was me.
And this way, that's right, it was you, Block. And this way, artists could get paid more. So you go, what if we're both right? What if it's both important that artists like Block, who, that's right, you produce, you're studying to produce content, aren't you? Videos and stuff.
Yeah, that's me.
Fantastic. So what I'm going to do is post the chat, the stuff in the link, in the chat. Sorry, post the rules, the general rules in the link. I'm also going to put the Twitch there, where we are going live on Twitch and YouTube at the same time. And then I realize I've also got to give you the Jamboard. Oh, I don't want people to edit it, just viewers. Thank you very much. Copy link. There we go. So I'm also going to be copying people's claims on this Jamboard. So as soon as I've got that up, there we go.
I've spent the past few minutes figuring out the stage thing, and I think I got it. So
Think you got it nailed?
good.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So I've put it there, the rules there in that chat. Oops, I got in trouble for spamming. Discord server invites. I forgot about that. I've been silenced for a minute. Okay. I should have deleted that out of it. Yeah, I'll just copy it from the next one next time. Live and you learn. Okay, so people can put now in the Ask to Speak channel, what would you like to argue for? Any position you hold deeply. It doesn't have to be a position you hold deeply, but it can work really well if it's something you're like in your bones, you grit your teeth when you find people disagree with that position, and you feel it's of some importance to you to bring people around to your way of seeing things.
And don't be shy. It's meant to be pretty difficult. Hey, yep.
There we go. Lay.com.
Hello. No, I'm just helping with the event.
Sure thing. Okay. Excellent. All right. So let's go looking through the audience for somebody who wants to.
Remember to use Ask to Speak if you want to bring up a point.
So they can, you can put your hand up there if you want to ask to speak. I can see we've got Kappa from yesterday as well.
For those wondering, we did switch the events. We're on an argument event now.
I'd be good at breaking down positions. I helped last time. Yeah, you're welcome to if you want to. So we can bring capitalism up to the stage. Who is saying he wants to sort of challenge or ask the question. Sounds like he's saying he doesn't want to necessarily be the one to present a position. Is that right, Kappa?
I could do either. I could present coercion as something that we should avoid.
Coercion is something that we should avoid.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So this can be the first topic that we're going to argue. Block and Lay, we can argue with it. We can challenge what he's saying. We can pepper him with insults. We're not bound by the rules. Kappa's job is to use the yes and not use the word but to continue to present his position. So coercion is something we should avoid. Is that your position?
Yes.
So I write these on this Jamboard link I'll share in a bit, so we can keep it. Yep. Excellent. All right. So tell us a bit about what you mean by that. Coercion is something we should avoid.
Sure. Yeah. I think that all human interactions should be voluntary. I think that we should do our best to avoid coercion, since typically and definitionally we want to avoid coercion. Coercion is going to be actions brought about in another person without their consent or against their will.
Coercion is actions brought about against somebody.
Against the will or against consent. And that could even be something as simple as like a persuasion, like that the other person has denied, and if it's repetitive, if it's repetitive.
So repeatedly trying to convince somebody of something is coercion to you. So what you're saying is, what I do for a living is to help people do something you consider bad, because what I do is help people be more persuasive.
I can give you an example, and it may be that, like, let's say I want chocolate ice cream. And you're like, oh man, why don't you try vanilla ice cream? And I'm like, I don't know, man. I just really like chocolate ice cream. I just don't want to try vanilla ice cream. If you were to be like adamant about me trying vanilla ice cream, I would think that could potentially become coercive.
Okay.
Maybe I'm giving too broad of a definition. Let's dial it back to.
I was gonna say you're gonna find yourself in some tough territory if everything like that's coercion.
Yeah. No, I think coercion is going to be any type of action that has some type of implied force. Like, if the persuasion had some implied, like, effect behind it, right? So if I don't try the vanilla ice cream, you're going to hit me. That's
right. Okay. So yeah. So and that would be a threat. So yeah, I could agree with that kind of coercion. What about if it was coercion in the case of this person has committed a heinous crime? They don't want to go to prison, but we want them to.
Well, I think we're not going to categorize that person as someone that's going to be deserving of the ability to pull the non-coercive part, because they themselves have already committed coercion. Have you ever heard of the paradox of tolerance?
Yes.
Because normally, you say you tolerate, if you're tolerant of those who are tolerant or whatever, but then like you're not you have to be intolerant of those who are tolerant.
Yes.
But then you can turn that around someone else. There's actually an answer to that. I don't know if you've heard of it. There's an answer to the paradox of tolerance. You are to be tolerant to those that are tolerant or that are not intolerant towards others.
Tolerant to those who are not intolerant, who are tolerant. You can be tolerant
to those. You can be tolerant to those that are tolerant, and you can be intolerant to those that are intolerant towards those that are tolerant.
Right. Yes, because I've always heard that.
We can.
Go on.
Yeah, we can reciprocate the anti-coercion to people that are reciprocative of the anti-coercion to other people, but if those people have not reciprocated that anti-coerciveness to people, then it's okay to be coercive to them.
I'm so confused right now. So
yeah, we can it's a small word salad. Once we get into the nitty-gritty, it'll be easier to explain.
It is, yeah. So we can reciprocate
this in
Go on, sorry, Block.
Hypotheticals maybe posing it in hypotheticals will work. So I guess if I pick like a bunch of scenarios, for example, you're the parent and your child really wants to go across the street, and you tell them that if they're gonna cross the street, if they're gonna try to cross the street, you're gonna spank them because they're not allowed to do that. Would that go under coercion for you?
Yeah, I think hitting your child is coercion. Yeah.
Okay.
Hitting your child is coercion.
And I have a defense, and I do have a defense for that. But I do agree. Like, yeah, it is coercion, and I actually,
Is having a bedtime coercion?
I'm sorry.
Is having a bedtime coercion?
If and only if the parent implies a threat.
So if they say like, you're gonna go to bed,
or
I'm gonna take away Xbox or something.
That's when it becomes
And that's something we should avoid.
Yeah. Because so there's two ways to go about it, and when it comes to children, everyone's always going to go to children when it comes to almost any of these type of topics, because they're looking for that that break in the principle, right? They're looking for that exception to drive home. And think about it. If your child's too young to reason with, to say, hey, we should probably go to bed at a good time because of this, and you can talk back and forth. If they're too young to reason, then they won't understand why they're being punished. You know? You get that? It doesn't really make any sense. What's the point of you just punishing them to make yourself feel better? And that's really detrimental to
Thanks
the
for joining us.
As somebody who, is considering being a parent, has looked into why parents do things that they do, I think about the fact that I don't want my kid to run across the street because there are cars on the street and my kid's going to get run over, and I need to make sure that they know that they can't do that.
Yeah, then you can explain it to them. You don't have to hit them to do it.
So that's exactly where to practice. Let's rewind a bit.
They won't understand why they're being hit.
Let's rewind. You can reason with them. You don't have to hit them. The job here is to make Block feel like heard and agreed with. So go back to your objection block.
I agree.
Good. Okay. Yeah. Start from there then. You agree? What else?
Restate your objection block so we can kind of get back.
All right. My objection was like, as somebody who would, from the mind of a parent, I would think about if my kid is crossing the street, I know that there's cars on the street and that can hurt them. And in my mind, spanking them might be a way to remind them and keep in their brain that they're not supposed to do that, so they don't get hurt more out there. As a form of discipline.
I agree. I'm actually looking at fostering. I've actually reached out to a few of the agencies in the area to kind of get the process going for the next couple of years. So you and I are in the same boat, actually. Maybe I might be a little more closer to that boat because I'm going to adopt like a 9-year-old versus, a baby, being, becoming a parent.
Sure.
And yeah, I would probably think the first thing you want to do is it's kind of like a short and sweet thing when it comes to and sweet in the sense of being what's it called? Facetious, right? We're using sweet in the facetious sense. And maybe spanking could be like a quick way and like a quick, effective way to maybe not let them do that. And that could be something. Think about it like this: if you tell someone or a child, especially a child, like 5 or 6 year old, not to do something, right? And even if you harm them in the process, in a mind that's growing, they're gonna want to understand for themselves what it is you're saying. So they may flirt with going in the road to kind of see what's going on. You see this happen all the time. You tell a kid, "Hey, please don't put your hand on the stove," and guess what's gonna happen eventually? They're gonna put their hand on the stove. There are a plethora of child psychologists, and there's so many studies to show that children, young minds essentially, they want to explore the world, and when you tell them no without reasoning, they got to fill that void somewhere. Does that make sense?
Sure. I think also just if we
So
pause
they may
on
want to
let's
jump
just
into
pause
the
for a
street.
second. On the delivery of that, what was that like, Block, to hear that reworded? Because you got to hear that response two ways. The first one was sure, but you don't have to hit them, and then the second seemed to be agreeing with you, finding a bit of a bond over considering adopting kids, and then presenting the argument that way. What was that like for you as the listener?
Yeah, sure. Let's make it the hypothetical where I am a parent, right? Like I'm not like myself, but what if I was? And that's how I discipline my kids. You just told me my the first time you told me my parenting method was flawed, and that could be offensive because that's like how I treat my kid. That's a huge part of my life. The second time, like, it's clear that you have the same interests as I do when it comes to raising my kid, and you're suggesting that your way might even be more effective in doing what I want to do already.
So this is exactly it, right? It goes from, because imagine how much dissonance that would cause if this was a real discussion. Because I've heard discussions like this. I know there's within my own family, I won't get into it, but there's divergent beliefs on the topics of giving robust spankings. What would it feel like for somebody to be sitting there at a dinner table thinking what you're saying sounds to me like you're saying, as Block just said, my parenting method is flawed? Like, where's that conversation going to go from there? But it's hard to avoid, isn't it, Kappa?
Yeah.
Excellent.
You gotta be able to practice. Like I have a lot of practice. That's why I went the butt case on purpose.
Oh, did you?
That's
Good on you.
practice.
Yeah, it's worth practicing too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love this
You gotta.
method.
That's why if you noticed when I went to say, think about it like this, that's where the butt should have been.
Yeah.
But I said, think about it like this. I
So-
reworded it into something else.
Oh, I really like that one. I'm going to put that one in the. I'm making a slide for assonance and dissonance, and that one I think is
Yeah,
quite
it's
in
a
the
good
middle.
thing to kind of, you
Yeah.
walk your interlocutor, right, through your own shoes, through your own glasses. You're both looking at the same issue at the same time, and you're almost bringing them to the conclusion with you
exactly.
instead of trying
Yeah.
to show them your conclusion and
Yeah.
hope that they agree.
Yeah, trust me, I love dunking on people.
Yeah,
But
so
It
good.
is fun, isn't it?
Oh, it's so fun to dunk people. I tried to do it to you the other day or last week when you made the performative contradiction in chat.
Yeah.
But we got into the discussion about abortion later, so I couldn't do it. But when I do the whole, hey, let's kind of try and look at it through my eyes. I'm pretty much telling them to keep their biases at the door. Don't
Yeah.
bring any biases into this. Come in with a clean slate and see what you think.
Sure. So, Fire Cubes has said they've got a question.
Alright, yeah. So when I'm talking about things,
I'm
with
sorry, just
people-
1 second.
You're
Are you able
coming
to
in.
raise your mic or get closer to it by any
Or just-
chance?
You can right click and turn them off.
I have on the maximum.
Yeah,
Okay.
I turned you up to 200%.
All right,
Alright, is it fine now?
go ahead.
Alright, yeah. So when I'm talking to people about something or when I'm arguing something, they just refer to things which already exist. Like, for example, I'm trying to think of an example. Guidelines on certain ways you should. It's basically a programming thing. For like coding,
Mhm.
you should style your code in a certain way.
Right.
And certain ways make it more accessible to people, because you can use a special character, the tab character, in your code, and that way
Yes.
people can resize that tab to be however big they want. But then people say no, you should just use spaces to like space things out.
Mhm.
So people are just like, no, but look at this convention which says you should use spaces. And it's like, okay, I don't know who made that convention, but they didn't specify any reason. And people just keep relying on that basically without actually providing any like argument as to why that's actually better.
And this is
So-
exactly some of the challenge. In fact, it's from delivering this with a company that was having issues with developers, with programmers, because I think there can be a challenge with programmers that some of what makes them very good at writing code is seeing the world in binary almost, like it's either this way or you're the wrong way. It's either my way or the wrong way. And so this is exactly where I would use that challenge. One of the ways you can dig past something like that, Fire Cubes, is to pull back and go, what's the goal here? Like as a question, because often what you'll find is people are disagreeing on, they'll be saying, you know, a great example I like to use on this is a disagreement I've had with my mum about whether hot food should be put straight in the fridge. And she
Oh,
feels, yeah, right. So she feels if you get something fresh out of the microwave, you should leave it on the counter to cool down to roughly room temperature before you put it in the fridge. I disagree with her on that. And if we don't get to the substance of why, the sort of what's the point here, we'll just stay disagreeing. Where it's quite funny because it wasn't until I explored it with her that I was like, what's the purpose? Like, what's the reason for this? What's the goal? And she said, well, if it's hot, it's going to warm up the rest of the fridge, and it's going to waste electricity. And I was like, okay, it's an interesting and very valid point. And mine wasn't at all on that point. Mine was on the point of A, I'll forget, and B, cultures of bacteria will grow quicker at room temperature. So if it spends longer in a sort of body temperature bandwidth, you're going to have greater growth of bacteria. So one of us is talking about hygiene and health, and one of us is talking about energy bills. If we don't recognize that we're talking about two separate things, so in your example, Fire Cubes, if we don't recognize that one of us is talking about how easy it's going to be to edit this code later and understand what the code actually does, and the other one's in fact talking about this is just an easier way to write the code the first time round, or whatever their advantage they see to it is. If we don't recognize we're talking about two different things, we will just say, I'm right, you're wrong. Whereas we won't go, oh, hang on, we're both right. We're just asking different questions.
I've never seen anyone like actually give an actual advantage. They just refer to people who say, like they just refer to existing conventions.
And that's
As like, oh, this is the default, so it's.
yeah. And the sort of, this is the way we've done it. Why do we do it this
Yeah.
way? Because that's the way we do it.
Because
Yeah.
that's the way it's done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is, yeah. So
Well,
these
tradition.
Yeah, tradition. No, that's the way we do it. It's the way everybody else does it. They're expecting to see the code in this way. And that can be tough to break. Arguing by agreeing can be a really useful tool there, where you go, yeah, it is important that people recognize what they're getting. So you might agree on some point where you go, I guess switching to this new style of using tabs might be a good idea, that we do it slowly, or that we make a decision and we weigh up the pros and the cons, so we don't just jump into it blindly, or something where it might agree with the underlying concern. Does that make sense, Firecubes?
Yeah. Right.
Thoughts?
There could be an alternative way to answer that too when it comes to talking about things being as they are, and to retain them. You could even ask something like, "Hey, why do you think it's important for us to retain this, retain this tradition?" And then if they say, "Well, people are kind of maybe wanting to recognize these things and you kind of expect at the beginning," you could say, "Well, I agree with that. I do agree with that. What if we could introduce something that's slightly different, be informative to people, but this way, yeah, and
Yeah.
this way we are actually giving them something that they want, because they want something in particular, and even though it could be slightly different, I think we could really put forward a particular message to maybe link them together and say, this isn't that big of a change, or something like that."
Yeah.
I'll take another angle on that too, because we have these conventions for things like coding, which they give you some indentation rules
G'day,
for how to
Bansal.
structure your function.
We're just on the Chatterbox server, agreeing while we argue. The same thing we were talking about in our chat the other day.
Oh, even I guess more influential applications is how you learn math in the American school system right now. I think of the Common Core system, which aims to teach people how to do math in a very logical approach. But the big issue I always found with it is the fact that it kind of tells you how to do it, and this is the way you're supposed to do it, and if you don't do it this way, you can't get full credit. And that's kind of where this exact phenomenon actually becomes really relevant to people's success, life, etc., etc.
Yeah.
It's like a really important issue.
Yeah, I really think it is. I think from the simple scale of how do I push back when my manager tells me to do something I consider to be silly, to how do I disagree with my parents at Christmas when they say something weird. And that challenge, I think, is even bigger nowadays, because Firecubes is going into programming, and most of the tech field, arguably lots of fields of work at the moment, have kids coming in who know more about the stuff than the senior leaders in the business. So I work with a media company, and they have social media managers who almost by necessity are like school leavers or fresh out of university. They've had 2 or 3 years in the job market, but they know how to make a TikTok channel that will absolutely pop. And if you have this old top-down structure where the leader says, right, post a video about this to push people to that, they need to be able to listen to the social media manager who says, if people spot that we are just monetizing the channel to flip people over to different revenue streams, they will abandon us in droves, right? And so it's how can we have that debate when I'm scared that my senior leader just gave me a direct order? So I love it as a useful skill. The other ones to look out for, they're doing anybody here should join the session that's coming up tomorrow in street epistemology. They use that a lot to talk to people about faith positions quite often. So what is it you believe? to be true, and people might say God, you can use many of the same questions there to sort of to explore someone's reason for wanting to keep coding in the same way, which is like, so if we did X, what would that be like? So you get people to hypothetically test a situation. If we switch to using tabs, what do you think would happen next? What would be the cost or something like that? So yeah, definitely join this channel and drop by tomorrow. Go ahead, sorry, Firecubes.
Yeah, never mind. Another thing is, when I'm like debating this, people just, whenever they run out of logical arguments, they just start shouting swears at me.
Yes.
So they're
not
basically
effective.
they're not interested in arguing, basically.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if people don't switch to tabs, it just becomes more painful to work with code, and the more code that uses spaces, the more likely that the company I'm gonna work in also uses spaces, and that's just gonna be worse, right? So it's not like, oh, like none of your business, let me use what I want. No, it's like actually gonna affect people. So if they don't want to have that argument, it's actually like I want to make them switch. So if they don't even want to even talk about that, then should I even try?
Well, what I would say is, so you've raised a few interesting things. It's a really good hint that somebody's experiencing dissonance if they start to swear at you or just go, I'm not even entertaining this topic anymore. I'm just sort of blah. And it's almost a sign that discussion, I think, is done for that point in time. That's where I would go, okay, maybe I'll come back to this tomorrow. Maybe I'll go and regroup and think about things and wait until the dissonance dies down. What I would encourage though, Firecubes, is when, rather than expressing the problem with this current system, if you express the problem with this current system that somebody backs, there's a pretty good chance that they are going to feel dissonance with every new thing you bring up. Perversely, the more relevant or poignant it is, the better your points are, the more dissonance it'll cause. So some of what you need to do is to sort of to explore for them, okay, what do you feel are the benefits of using these spaces instead? Are there ways we could get those benefits and get the benefits of using tabs as well, to sort of to get around to it a different way where you go, I can see what you're saying about the benefits of space. And I think, even particularly, here's one of the things I think about it, and I would go, if I just think their point of view has no merit to it, that is more likely typically that I have misunderstood what they are saying. Not that they are totally wrong. It's usually to me a sign that I haven't understood a core thing that's important to them, maybe because they haven't expressed it or they've expressed it poorly, or sort of they want to keep that bit hidden sometimes. They don't want to tell you why, and that's because they're so used to using spaces. They tried to switch to tabs once and it was embarrassing and difficult, and so they stopped. We don't know. We just want to be able to explore it so that they can get that on the table.
Right, and people say like, so I tell them like the problems with spaces, and like if you use spaces, then you can't do so and so, and they're like, okay, well that's your problem. Like, what?
So that's the thing, and that's such an example of what we're talking about. If you use spaces, you won't be able to do X. That statement causes dissonance for them, and then they'll want to reduce that dissonance by going, well, that's your problem, nothing to do with it. So it's a really good example, in fact. I reckon let's
It's funny because argumentation is not just an art of language, but it's also an art of psychology, and that's huge.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Imagine we could fix big issues this way. Imagine we could get to sort of going, and if you look at a lot of big issues, they could be solved this way. The one I often think about is immigration. When people say more or less immigration, it's always the question I have is like, more or less than what? I don't even know what the current numbers are or what the current restrictions are. I don't have a number.
And what they're
in my
aiming
head.
for, right?
Exactly. Yeah. What's the goal here? Is that we have more people in the economy to be working, skilled people. What is the actual question? And you quite often find that's sort of the secondary conversation. The first one is the migrants, and then we have these sort of impassioned positions that aren't even really clear. So let's I want to move on to a new one so we can hear you using the tool again. Block, it sounded like you if we dug around would have a fairly strong view on something to do with math, the way maths.
Actually, maybe.
Go on. What sort of position you hold there?
I think as a requirement, you should not have to learn past algebra in a public school system up like K-12.
Okay, excellent. Oh, this is a tough one. I'm going to argue with you, even though
Oh,
I agree
yeah.
with this, because I agree with you broadly speaking, but I'm gonna try and tear you apart. For people who've just joined us, the goal here is that that Block's going to be stuck using yes and to be charitable interpretations of my argument. Find the middle ground. Could both of our points be valid? Appeal to shared values with unifying phrases. Adjust his position, but don't abandon it. Ask questions, make me laugh or get me on side, or make all of us on this panel lay fire cubes as well. You can speak up and argue with this.
Right.
Anything.
And before we get started, if you are joining from outside, remember to join the server. And if you have Nitro, please boost because you get some nice currency out of that. I wish I could. Cool. Now that that's out of the way, want to get started?
Yeah, let's do it. I'm going to put the rules in the chat again so people can see what they're listening in for. Go for it, Block.
All right. I'll start with my claim. I believe that in the K through 12 education pathway, the math requirement should stop at algebra.
So what it really is about learning to learn. And so sometimes by forcing kids to learn stuff that is sort of ridiculous or difficult to understand, what they're really learning is how can you learn things.
I agree with that a lot. And as somebody who takes higher math courses by choice, like I've taken calculus and statistics and some higher math as of now, I've found a lot of help. I found a lot of personal gain from being able to learn these higher level logic problems in the form of high level math problems. That's because my brain works really well with that type of logic. Sadly, that's not how everybody's brain works. I think that kind of thinking does need to stay being nurtured, and math might not be the only way to do that. Critical thinking courses can go beyond math. And those are ones that should be pushed more in terms of requirements. Things like civics courses replacing basic history and rhetoric courses instead of some literature courses. It's not just math that we're talking about here. It's everything. They all nurture your mental growth in terms of your logical capacity.
Oh, so
Can I ask a question?
go for it, yeah.
What exactly is meant by algebra here? Because I mean, is it like x
I
plus
consider
2 equals 5, is that algebra?
I consider personally algebra 1 as it's defined in the United States. That's kind of where I personally would draw a line, just because I don't think you should stop at pre-algebra where you have like x plus 1 equals 2, because that's still basic math in my head. The logic problems start in algebra, but they, past that they get much more complex.
I don't live in the U.S., so I'll have to look that up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I don't know really how to describe it because there's just like a whole list of concepts that covers, but
So which are the ones you think need to go?
I think geometry, calculus, pre-calculus, statistics past basic probability, right?
Geometry.
Those ones, geometry should not be required, I don't think. Now, basic geometry, stuff like area of a square, volume of a cylinder, that's not high school geometry how I would consider it. We're talking about circle theorems. We're talking about congruency, all the theorems and stuff. Yeah, that doesn't need to be required, I don't think. Yeah, at least in general education.
I'm trying to think of an argument against this, and it is calculus is actually really useful.
Calculus is extremely useful, and I know because, well, I finished my calculus first year, and I've studied past my first year quite a lot, and I think it's probably the most useful math I've ever learned. However, I just did that. Okay.
Started off really well though. When
calculus is an extremely,
So just to pause on that point.
I set myself up.
But it was really good when I said calculus is useful and you agreed and added extremely. That's
Yes.
a really using the tool. Just however. Yeah. So calculus is useful.
Yes.
Go again from there.
Yeah, calculus is super useful to me. Just as a lot of other things are useful to other people that I have not studied, because I wasn't even required to study things like British literature, which some people will get a lot of value out of. I was not required to study advanced chemistry, which some people will find extremely useful. So calculus is not the only extremely useful concept, and it's certainly not one that everyone needs to understand in order to live a fulfilling intellectual life down a path that they are suited for. How's that?
Pause. How was that? What was that like for you?
That was a bit more challenging because like I know that I really like math. I really like math and I know I'm good at math, and if I could teach people higher math myself, I would love to. But that's like it's hard to argue against it, but I know that people are, I just know that that's not something that I need people to be able to always do. So I have to really dig into myself and know what I believe here, which you should do if you're going into an argument anyway. So it helps.
Well, I don't think you do. Just to straight away disagree with you and break all of the rules of my own arguing course. I don't think you have to be fully prepared because I'm not sure if being fully prepared is possible. And I think that what this method allows is that we can get partway through a point, an impassioned point, and go, maybe I don't have enough information. Maybe not I don't have enough information because I'm suggesting enough isn't really a thing here.
Maybe I haven't considered all of the information.
Yeah, maybe knowing all of the things available on a topic is just not possible on any given topic. And so that's what makes both of our opinions valid here. So, because otherwise
I like that
find
outlook, actually, yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise sometimes I find myself going, well, but you're you work on reception or something. What do you understand about calculus? And sort of want to discard their point because I've decided they don't have an expertise, rather than going, hang on, maybe your point is valid because you don't know calculus, and that's something that you're going to be presenting. Yeah, MESAG, is that how I say that? MESAG.
Yeah, no, nailed it. MESAG.
MESAG. You're an engineer, so you wanted to sort of weigh in on this mathematics.
Yeah. So I totally get what you were saying earlier when you were talking about basically not everyone thinks easily in terms of mathematics, and there's a certain point where people's education in terms of mathematics is almost saturated because of the way they may particularly think. For me, I've always kind of had an easy time with math, and in my engineering courses, I went up to differential equations, Cop 1, 2, 3, differential equations, discrete math.
Yeah, all
And
the good stuff.
honestly, it was not really understand, how those higher level math really translated into quote unquote reality and kind of physics and how it kind of all came together. So for me, I couldn't actually find the value until I had gotten to that point. And the thing that I want to ask you is, so that being the case, how would you basically structure education to make sure people can get to that point and make sure that they can get the understanding that they truly can get from it? Because if you stop the education at a certain point, the potential to get to that understanding may not have necessarily been fulfilled.
Yeah, I think it would be important to recognize that I wouldn't advocate for blocking any of this kind of education. It should still be always made available because it is really important information that so many people will get so much use out of, especially early on as they're entering into a professional age. Like, when you're going off to college or work or whatever. Which is why I think there's so many different paths of knowledge that someone can drive home and really change the world with, that don't require you to know all of the other ones as deeply. So I think early on in your education time, we'll arbitrarily say like K through 6, that can be your time to really drill in some fundamental ideas. Add, subtract, multiply, divide, comprehend an article. Basic skills that we learn in our elementary school years and early high school years. As you get up past those grades, you start getting more choice and actually studying what you want to study and really exposing yourself to the rigorous coursework that you'll actually thrive in. You
So
know what I mean?
I get what you mean, but the thing that
But
I have a hard time wrapping my head around is
so you can
because
practice this too,
when
Mesag. Go back
hmm
and agree,
hmm
and then don't use the word but.
I was using the word "but" with two T's. No, I'm just kidding.
Those are fantastic. You carry on.
Well done, well done.
uh, so basically, uh, my concern is having that superficial exposure is just that, and my concern is if we give kind of a wide breadth of education to young people. Me personally, I'm 26. I currently have a degree in engineering. I worked in an engineering field for a few years, and I'm pursuing another degree in computer science. So even now, being 26, I haven't quite figured out what I want to do. So limiting exposure, to K through 6 is concerning for me because some people don't actually truly understand what they want to do until they're exposed deeply to something or deeply to a subject.
I see.
That's a
And
pretty important point. And I think a way that we could help that is not necessarily by pushing students through rigorous coursework that they won't succeed in, and instead restructuring our year, maybe taking away a lot of our dependence on standardized test scores and stuff like that. So then we can actually explore topics. When we get up to algebra, we can explore the topic and, towards the end of the year, even expose some of the later topics without it being detrimental to whether or not you're going to move on. Because, yeah, I would love for everybody to see the beauty in math, in English, in art, all the things that might trigger their inspiration to do something more.
definitely, and I just want to
Yeah,
clarify that I don't even mean necessarily math specifically. I mean in any
yeah,
subject that can
Yeah.
be explored
for sure.
deeply.
Yeah.
I feel like
Which is why I don't want to take away art class from elementary school either. Like, I think that's honestly a really constructive use of their time, not necessarily to be good artists, but to have that exposure to expressing themselves in ways other than, English words, because that's just a mental development thing that helps a lot too.
So then to argue against your point, Block, I think some of the reason that schools focus on maths for so long is because you can easily mark it. So you can say you've used the correct equation, you came out with the right number, so I can sit there with 10 tests and just flip through and go tick cross tick cross tick 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 cross cross. And mark it really easily. Whereas a lot of those other subjects that you're talking about, I think is what you get is a challenge of interpretation, and it becomes very subjective, and you expect
Math
a
is
marker.
functional.
Yeah, and so you expect a marker. If it's a thing on how do you weigh your sources and decide which of these two articles is more credible, which I think is a much more important skill these days, or how do you teach yourself a new skill?
Absolutely,
Again,
yeah.
really useful skill these days. How do I mark a kid on that though? And so unless we're going to drastically increase funding for schools, how are we going to get around the budget problem and the subjective problem where some people give high marks, some will give low marks, and you won't have a standardized testing score anymore, so that'll kick some kids in the teeth? Or we massively increase budget so that people are able to do that, but it's now prohibitively expensive to go to school.
In addition to that, just to add a little bit onto that, it's also one of those things where children really need structure in their learning. And I'm not trying to advocate for standardized testing. I'm just trying to say structure and expectation is important for childhood development. So there needs to also be a means in which that can be kind of sewed into anything. So how would
Definitely.
you be able to incorporate that into the structure you've already kind of expressed?
So the idea of having to grade, in a in a fair way is pretty important, and also the structure for young children is extremely important to their development as people, um, which is why I think one of my ideas on how the education system would work as a whole is that it's more structured early on, where so like I guess your earlier years, everyone's learning just about the same things, and as you go on, you're kind of it's almost a gradient out into a little more branched off learning. Not quite the level that a university might give, because that's for university, but maybe a smoother transition between those. And the grading issue is really difficult. And the reason for that is because it's grown very differently than the education, I guess, philosophies have. Where now more than ever, I believe teachers really do want to give you all of these resources to give you, I guess, mental stimulation, mental growth. They really want to actually make something worthwhile out of your education, and it's difficult. It's difficult because they have to balance sometimes between that and rehearsing for this test. And I like to use the word rehearsing personally, but I guess that's another conversation.
So that's a good. It's been a good discussion. Let's wrap that up there and then talk about the sort of the skills of it, because I think there were some things you did really well in their block. What were the things you were mindful of? Were you sort of deliberately speaking as you went through?
Yeah, I was definitely really deliberately thinking, and it makes you think more than otherwise, because if you're trying to rebut an argument, you're listening for the part you disagree with, and and it's not only is it easy to gloss over the part I agree with, but it's also easy to not get the full content of their argument because of that, because you're selectively listening. This time I have to listen to everything all the way through, really consider it, and I found that I think we all want similar things out of the education system, and the only difference is how we actually think we would get there.
Yeah.
I
And this-
really
Go on.
liked your acknowledgement of the limitations to your ideas too. You didn't try
Yeah.
to double down on anything. You kind of went with the flow
Yeah.
of things and kind of took what you could get out of it.
Yeah, it
Right.
forces me to be flexible, and that's actually really healthy, I think. It felt healthy. You know what I mean? It felt healthy
Felt
that
healthy.
way because, it felt healthy as an argumentative strategy, because not only do I feel like I'm gaining insight that I haven't already considered before the conversation, but I'm flexible enough to adapt my own ideas into these new things that I'm picking up very deliberately, and sometimes changing it a little bit.
Are
I
we just
like
picking
that.
topics?
Yeah. Say again, sorry.
Are we just picking topics to argue about?
Yeah,
'Cause I have a
yeah.
topic.
So people are sort of coming up. I gave that one to Block as a sort of as a topic to talk about. If anybody else would like to present a position and have a practice at using this skill Block was just using to agree while arguing or argue by agreeing, let us know what position you would like to argue for in the Ask to Speak channel here.
I have a topic, but I'm on cooldown.
Okay, sure. Let's just I'll just see if anybody
Wait,
else
no.
wants to step up, and then if they don't, you're welcome to have another crack if you want fire cubes. Also, should say for anybody joining us, make sure you join the Chatterbox channel, because it's really fun. There's lots of really good discussions and
It really
debates
is.
and things happening here all the time. So make sure you join it in your while you're dropping by. I think it's a really great. One of the things I wanted to say about how well you were doing that was how you were continually coming back to that thing I was describing as unifying phrases, or something that everybody's going to agree with. It's not quite, but it's similar to a Barnum statement. I don't know if anybody's heard a Barnum statement, but Barnum statements are sort of things that people would agree with about themselves. So saying, I can see you're a thoughtful person, or you seem pretty intelligent to me. Those kind of statements, every person who hears them goes, yeah. These are not Barnum statements, but
I was actually going to ask
Go on.
I want to ask a question earlier
Sure.
about kind of the psychological aspect of discussions like this, because typically what happens is sometimes people kind of may double down on their ideas or kind of have that dissonance.
Yeah.
And the thing I'm prone to doing personally is I kind of intuitively see the psychological workings of a situation. And what I tend to do is, in trying to point them out for the sake of clarifying, not necessarily as a gotcha, but as a, do you understand where I'm coming from? This is kind of the position I'm finding the conversation to be in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can either go the good direction where they kind of have the self-awareness and the perspective, and kind of we can go from there, or it's even further doubling down. So how do you kind of address that? Is it better to not even bring up kind of the psychological perspective of a situation? How do you kind of incorporate that into an argument effectively?
So, yeah, great question. So so if I'm to make sure I'm understanding the question, it's sort of, if you spot that there is a flaw or a sort of psychological issue at play in the conversation that's throwing it off course, or somebody's just saying something that's wrong, and you feel it'd be valuable to point it out, but then people double down. Is that the gist?
Essentially, if they kind of continue to have that dissonance and they're not able to kind of see it from your perspective, or you kind of continue down that path, it can either exasperate it or it can clear the air, but it's usually one or the other. I haven't found much middle ground in that situation.
Can I try to answer that?
Sure, go for it.
Yeah, I think there's probably some conversational tricks out there, but I'm not one to know those. For me, it's as simple as pause for a second. Let them know, like, explicitly, I don't think you're unintelligent. I just really want to understand your point and hope that you can understand mine. And then after that, you can evaluate whether the conversation is worth continuing at that moment. Because sometimes it isn't. And that's just because we're humans with flesh brains. Like, some people, they get actually really worked up over stuff. And that's not a good condition to argue with. So sometimes you just gotta take a pause and come back later.
I agree with that. All I would tweak about that is, absolutely, I agree with that sentiment. I don't think you're unintelligent. I just switch it from a double negative. I think you're an intelligent person. I think you've got valid views.
That's a good point.
Just because there's a subtle inference you can hear, right? I don't think you're unintelligent is a little bit like, but I just did say the word unintelligent out loud, didn't I? Whereas, what we want to get across is, like, we can both be thinking deeply about this topic. And some of my answer to it as well, Misag, is if I'm accepting that there could be flaws in reasoning in their argument, I need to, if I'm honest with myself, accept that those exact same things might exist in mine.
Oh, definitely.
And if all I do is, it's a little bit like Block put it really well. I had to listen to everything rather than just listen to the flaws. Because you might sometimes find there is a flaw to the argument and the argument's still sound. Or there's a flaw to the argument, but because it's so held with such conviction, pointing out that flaw won't get you anywhere. Exactly as you said, it could cause the person to double down. So there's a few strategies I will use. Sometimes street epistemology style questions. They're running a session on that tomorrow, which is sort of these interesting questions, how to test someone's belief in sort of reasoning for holding a position.
That's what it always seems to go to. It always seems to go down this philosophical route where you have to kind of investigate the entire person's being. It seems like to get to.
I think that's a good way to approach it, at least. Yeah.
And that can be effective. And the thing is sometimes when you're having a conversation with someone, like say in a Discord, person for the sake of understanding that person, but to give basically exposure to like an audience or the people there to that situation. So would you change strategy if that was the case? Say they had a large flaw in their argument and you were trying to point that out to an audience, but you don't want to jeopardize the conversation itself.
Sure. Yeah. So this is a tool I will use sometimes. I think it's sort of, if this was the only tool you had, you'd struggle. Yeah. Because somebody might say something really rude, or that what happens if somebody goes, "You're a moron?" Like, I have to go, "Yes, I am," and I'm a big moron, you know, like if you just use yes and all the time, you've only got one tool, you won't be useful for some of the jobs. And I think that's that point you're raising, which is, what if I'm not trying to convince this person, but I'm trying to convince a wider audience? Like we're sitting here and there's 5 of us on the stage and there's 50 people in the audience. What if I'm more talking to them? And the other side of that, I would say, is I have changed some pretty deeply held convictions as a result of somebody going, oh, come on, that's ridiculous, you're a moron. You know? So if it's just about where it comes from, like my position I changed was on the 9/11 issue because I talked to my brother about it. I really, really respect him. He's very clever. He reasons through things in a way that I often try to emulate. So because I had that rapport and I looked up to him, when he went, oh, come on, that's ridiculous, he didn't need to say much more. Sure, it caused a lot of dissonance, but I think sometimes a bit of a slap in the face can help. The challenge is if that came from, Booty Lover 446 on a Discord server who was saying, come on, you're an idiot. Am I really going to want to go through that dissonance to go, oh, maybe that's a really important point that I need to consider from Booty Lover 446? Or am I going to go, oh, you're a moron, look at your silly username, what do you know about blah, 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 that's an ad hominem, like just suddenly find all of these ways to fight back and relieve the dissonance by making him the idiot. It's a horses for courses thing. I wouldn't use it all the time. I would just use it. My main flag for when I want to use more of this is when I'm experiencing dissonance myself. If I start feeling like, hang on, I'm being
How do you
attacked,
recognize that personally for yourself?
So yeah, great one. And that is by doing, so yeah, one of the things is we've talked about it, is swearing. One, I'm making a list up here on my Jamboard, which I can share the link again. Swearing. So if I want to argue or swear or attack a person rather than their point, I'm just adding this to the thing as well. That will tell me I'm experiencing a bit of dissonance. The thing Block said before is a really prescient, very interesting point that I think we can take away, which is he said, I'm usually listening for the bit I disagree with. That to me is a sign I'm experiencing dissonance. It shows that I'm feeling a gut level motivation to challenge something. Go on, Fire Cubes.
What would you do if you were experiencing dissonance?
That's when I would do the same thing that Block was talking about before. Pause. Try to listen to some of the phrasing that the person just used and fire it back to them, and then pivot around to a topic to a different way that's going to help me relieve my dissonance. So if we're on an education topic, I might sort of recognize that I want to rejoin with the word but and go, but the thing is, it's just that, and if I find myself wanting to do that and not hear the rest of their point so I can disagree with something they said, it'll be to breathe. And as a trick here, if you want to be more attractive, more intelligent, and sleep better, breathe through your nose and into your belly, not through your mouth and into your chest. Nose, belly breathing. And then go, how can I pivot where we're going to find common ground? So I might ask a question, if it's the education thing, what's important about this? I guess, and I might also use sort of humbling phrases, which might be like, I think I'm probably missing some of your point here. So can we go back and go, what's important about this issue with Mouse? What do you think is most important about childhood education or something? And from there, they're likely to say something which is like, I just want kids to get a full enough education that they're really set up in life. Or something, they're usually likely to come back, if you pick the right question, to come back to something where you go, yeah, me too. And that's usually going to be like, awesome. Now we've not just reduced dissonance, but I believe we need to coin the other side of dissonance and talk about assonance, which is like where we love the sound of what someone says, where we go, awesome point. Yeah, I agree with that. If we can get back to that assonance where we're sort of standing shoulder to shoulder rather than face to face, that's where we're probably going to find we're going to be able to change minds. Because I will change my mind a bit to match with my brother if I think he's smart. I won't change my mind to match with Booty Lover 446 who called me an idiot.
But they love booty so
Lover
much.
446. Bro, why are you hating on Booty Lover?
What if the conversation is specifically about booties? I think that's the exception.
Yeah, maybe that would be the exception. That's true. So I wanted to throw now to Magnus. I know Fire Cubes has also got another one he proposed, but as he's done one, we're going to go with Magnus's, who's proposed for us the argument that buying products that have cruelty towards human in the production line is immoral, which is the opposite of a position we had yesterday, isn't it?
Yeah, that's deliberate, because actually after that talk, it got me thinking about it,
I like that. So that's another assonance-inducing phrase I'm going to put up here before we even get started. this is the other thing I try to be mindful of. How can I, while being authentic, I don't mean just go and pander to people. How can I, while being authentic, say things that are going to make people feel great? And one of the things that I think most people love hearing is, oh, that thing you said yesterday, that really got me thinking. So that's a great one. So Magnus is going to present this argument to me. To anybody who's just joined, what we're doing is a workshop on arguing by agreeing. Magnus's job is to agree with what we're going to be the peanut gallery here. So the rest of us up here are going to argue with his point. We're going to turn it up a bit than we have in the previous ones, which is we are going to really challenge and argue, poke fun at his position. His job is to use yes and, not yeah but. If we're listening out for that, your opinion's valid, but my opinion's more valid. We're listening for that kind of construction of but, and we're going to not let him use it. But our job as the peanut gallery is to try and make him use it so we can catch him and go, got you. I'm putting the links to both the live stream for this and the rules in the chat now so you can see them. Yes and, be charitable, find the middle ground, adhere to shared values or goals, adjust your position but don't abandon it. Ask questions, make them laugh, compliment them. Okay, you ready to take it away, Magnus?
Yes. So my claim is that buying products that have cruelty towards humans in the production line is immoral.
See, I really like my shoes being super cheap, and I think if we pay people to make those, we're probably only going to get voluntary labor and very expensive shoes.
Oh yeah, actually, I totally agree. I buy cheap shoes myself, you know. What got me thinking about it though was that supply and demand and the market would probably kind of work with that, you know, because people are used to lower prices. So I would think that they would find ways to make the shoes as cheap.
Oh, I
So,
like that one. That was a good response.
How would you apply your claim to situations, say if they were manufacturing syringes for medical purposes, something of that nature? How would you justify ceasing that if the detriment to society or the people being affected is greater than the situation in which they're manufacturing it?
Well, with that situation, I would think that countries with their medical goals, I think before discontinuing the syringes, I would hope that they would make ways to make syringes before they would do that. And I think that would, like, I think you would agree that most reasonable healthcare systems would do that.
But if that were the case, why is it not already the situation that we have when it comes to general manufacturing and production?
You know, that's a very good question, and I don't know, to be honest.
Awesome. Just pause there, not stop. What do we think about that? That's an awesome point, and I don't know. How does that? What's that like? Who was that? Was that Misag arguing against?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was that like to hear Magnus say that's a good point, and I don't know?
I'm upset that I can't be angrier.
This is the thing, right? How often in arguments do we feel like I've got to have an argument? My case needs to be absolutely rock solid without a single leak in it, and I need to have an answer to every question, even questions I haven't asked myself before. And you can hear people making crap up in the middle of an argument, whereas I think that's such a disarming strategy, Magnus, to go, great question, I don't have an answer. And to go, yeah, I'm going to acknowledge there are some things in life that are tough and we're not always going to be able to answer. Yep, so carry on.
Yeah.
Definitely
Like
handled
at
it
this-
beautifully.
Because at this point in the conversation, I would say, yeah, I think we both agree on the syringe part. So I think we could focus on something else like shoes or something.
Again, a really good unifying phrase. I think we both agree on X. So let's talk about, really.
So what kind of cruelty are we talking about?
What I was like, from what I know, because I only know like a limited amount of child cruelty. So the ones I've seen is like with cocoa fields, and I've heard about like textile factories with toxic chemicals and not proper like shielding from the chemicals and stuff.
Right.
So
go ahead, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
So what you're saying is, rather than it being the government's job to what am I trying to say? regulate that rather than it being the organization's responsibility, their corporate social responsibility to fix their supply chain issues. We defer that responsibility to the consumer.
Yes. Now you're getting onto my point, Axel. I like that. Thank you. So what I'm thinking is, you've seen maybe, like in my country, people have like thought things are unhealthy, like products with trans fat in it, and then people just stopped buying it, and that made the company take the trans fat out. So that's a clear example of where you can see where market can change like production. So I think the same could go with shoes. And then I would say that, like, if you're seeing a crime being committed and you can do something about it and not do something about it, kind of makes you involved. And I think when you can do something in a production line, then you should do it. Because if you don't, you're an accomplice in my eyes.
Okay.
So
I think that's a
with-
really... Go on. Sorry.
I was going to make the point with marketing being such a huge factor for companies and what they can produce and sell. I actually used to work with a man who would audit his company internationally, and he would go to factories overseas and basically audit those factories and ensure that their qualities and standards they provide for their workers was upheld. So my concern is, if there was an article or bad publicity in one factory, which was not meeting those standards and may have missed an auditing cycle or some weird thing had happened, the entire company would suffer sales, putting other locations that do have good standards at risk and putting those workers at risk for supporting themselves. So how would you be able to differentiate between a case by case situation, or whether a company is holistically subjecting their workers to those environments and those conditions? Because I think we all know that a lot of things can get muddied on the internet, and when information exchanges a lot of hands, things can get skewed heavily.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And how I would, like, this is just an idea from the top of my head, but I would maybe have some like non-profit organizations that go and like verify conditions and stuff like that in places, and then people can choose if they want to follow that places like recommendations. Yeah, because it's all about choice for me in the end too. Like, I don't want you not to be able to buy something, you know.
I like that unifying phrase. It's about choice in the end. I just want to ask if we can go back a moment to the trans fats issue, because I think that's a really good point you raised, and I like it when somebody comes up with an example of something. They can go, here's an example of X causing Y.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Is that an example of people not buying trans fats for their own needs? So they've said, I'm not going to buy these products anymore because they contain trans fats and because that's bad for me. And could you think of an example where we've got that same consumer shift where people say, I'm not buying this product because it's bad for somebody else?
Yes, you're asking me for examples?
Yeah, because trans fats to me seems like somebody saying, I'm not buying it because that's going to make me unhealthy. Whereas what you're talking about sounds like, don't buy these shoes because it's going to make somebody else suffer.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Where I'm coming at this is, I'm arguing for morality. The other point was just an example of our effect on market. I was just trying to soften it up a little bit, you know, just make it maybe relatable, because it's maybe like more common in other places, because because people think it's so distant and they don't think that they can do anything about it, while I would say that affecting the supply chain could change things, you know.
I like it. Good answer.
So why can't we have like governments? Don't we have like things to
regulate?
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree that should be. Well, yeah, I would think so, that governments could do that, but they are not. So I think it's a matter of choice and the importance. And I still think the freedom of buying the product is important, because like all of us here, we're dependent on electronics. So I just want it to be a choice. And if a lot of people agree with me, that would just be nice if we could affect the supply chain.
Excellent. Let's pause that one there. What do we think? How's it working?
I mean, I agree with that.
Yeah, it's a good point.
I wish there was more depth. I understand that, knowing your limitations and agreeability can be effective, but I think it has to be effective in conjunction with a depth of knowledge for a claim you're making. Because if the response is consistently, I agree with you, or finding some kind of common ground, but not having the depth underneath that common ground, it just doesn't
I thought that was the
feel.
point of the practice.
Yeah.
Oh no, for sure. I get it. I'm just kind of bringing up a general point, generally, not necessarily that there's anything wrong with how you're doing it now, but in terms of just
And not but.
And my point is, I guess, when it comes to general arguments or debates or discussions, when someone comes in with a claim, and I know this is just practice, I'm not really talking about you, I'm just talking generally, and they don't have enough knowledge to continue the conversation, sometimes I think that can be a detriment to their point of view, and they can learn from someone else that may know a lot about it, but also it can be a detriment to others in the conversation, and it may muddy the waters even more and have the opposite effect you want to have when it comes to kind of influencing opinions and actually pushing for something or an outcome that you want.
Absolutely. Yeah, so it's it's a challenge, isn't it? We want to be well informed so that we've got a bank of responses and things to go with, and the other side of it can be we can end up going overboard with it. I certainly know on topics I know a lot about. Go back to my thing that I mentioned before when I was a 9/11 truther. I had read so many things, all of them saying the same thing, of course. I was always just using the confirmation bias to prove to myself that 9/11 was an inside job, just finding topic after topic after topic, that then I would end up sort of spam firing or gish galloping my way through a conversation. So it's an interesting balance to strike, isn't it? Which is like, could I pick a few good examples? Could I, what I think you were doing well there, which was also leaving some open and going, it's about choice, or that's a great point and I don't have an answer. And to accept there's some solutions, all solutions, I think, almost all of them are imperfect. There will be costs.
Because, and where I think like the questions kind of went on a miss is that I was trying to keep it on the topic of morality, because government legislation or like company like reliability or falsified news is not the topic of morality, because like that's where I was trying to keep it. It's like, is it morally okay if you're like indirectly participating in something bad?
I think something to keep in mind, especially when it comes to kind of moral-based arguments, is understanding that people's lines and the morals they have can be vastly different. We have a lot of things that we kind of have similarities in, like, most people would agree killing someone else is wrong, stealing is wrong, things of those natures. But the same way you were saying, or someone earlier was saying, we kind of all have similar outcomes that we would like. However, the ways in which we want to get there may be different. I think that needs to be kept in mind, because when you're making a moral argument, you have to be very clear about the parameters you're setting and what morals you ascribe to, and kind of how that plays within the context of what you're wanting to discuss.
Yeah, and that's where I was going in. It's like I tried to explain, like, the thing with, like, if something wrong is being done to another person, and if you're in the vicinity and you can't do something about it, but you don't, then that might be constituted like an immoral thing to do.
As an example, say you say that, and then someone says, "Oh, but isn't that their choice to work there? Or if they don't work there, they're homeless and starve. So what's worse?" And the lines in which you draw can be very different in that situation, in terms of who you're talking to, in terms of where they draw their lines.
Yeah,
excellent.
Definitely.
Good discussion too. We've got up Tenfold has asked to answer. I can see also Emmy in the Ask to Speak chat has said e-dating should e-dating be considered a real relationship, which is an interesting one. First, so we've got Tenfold, who said,
So personally attacked.
say again? You feel
I
personally
feel
attacked?
personally.
I've got questions about that one. Does one have to be monogamous if it's e-dating? So the 2014 Bundy standoff was terrorism. What was the Bundy standoff? Is that Ted Bundy? No, it couldn't have been Ted Bundy in 2014.
Nope, not Ted Bundy. No.
So the Bundy standoff was terrorism. You're going to have to give us some background on it.
So basically, the Bundy family, Cliven Bundy, basically, he owned the government in excess of over, I'd say, like, I don't know, $10 million in grazing fees for his cattle to graze the land that the Bureau of Land Management owned in Nevada, in the lands of the Silver Butte, where basically he was a cattle rancher and he owned lots of acres of land in which his cattle grazed that belonged to the Bureau of Land Management. And since 1993, he owned that excess of $1 million. Then, basically, what happened in 2014, he was riling up and getting the attention of many other ranchers and just patriotic people. And what happened was that in the desert of the high sun, they all gathered when the BLM showed up and rounded up his cattle as trespass cattle. They took it away from his grazing land because of his indebtedness to them.
Okay.
And what they did is these armed patriots, they all stood guard under this wash, basically under two underpasses in this small place called Bunkerville, where Cliven Bundy's ranch was, along with his sons Ammon and I guess Bill. And what they did is that they stood guard, most of them armed to the teeth.
Wow.
There's one photograph of the patriots that stood on the bridge, far from where all the patriots were on the first one, aiming at a gun through the cinder blocks of aiming like an AR-15 through the cinder blocks of the bridge. No shots were fired. It was no bloodshed. But in the days coming, basically he got the attention of all these patriots online for them to gather, and he threatened to start a range war. Cliven Bundy, he's quite a character. I mean, he's a little bit racist, a little bit prejudiced against African Americans. He said that the blacks wouldn't have benefited under slavery, and basically what this whole thing was about states' rights. So they stood. It was basically a standoff. So you had the armed patriots on one side, and you had the BLM on the other in this small place called Bunkerville for a few days, lasting from April 9th to April 10th, I believe, in 2014.
Okay.
And
so
what many
let me just
progressive and
let me
sure.
just pause you here so I can get a gist of the conversation. You can give us more. It can keep giving us the background as you give the argument. Is it your position that it was the Bundy family and the sort of the patriots who were terrorists, or the government troops who were the terrorists? Which side was the terrorism?
There's during that time there was a whole raging debate. I'm not wholeheartedly against or for rather the Bundys were terrorists or not, but I was about to say before you interrupted that a lot of progressives and people on the progressive side say that the Bundys were terrorists ever since this one House Democrat from the Nevada Senate said that, hey, these people are just shy of terrorism. I forgot his name, but basically these weren't troops. This was the Bureau of Land Management. They're a federal organization that owns most of the land in the western states. They own land equivalent to the states of Oregon, parts of Washington, almost all of Utah
Can I make
and
an
Arizona.
observation before
Yeah.
we go further? So I think you could make all of the same arguments that you've made, and without basically creating a division. Because when you said progressives and you made distinctions in terms of, say, sides or groups, you will immediately turn off anyone who may associate with that group, and it becomes very hard to listen to what you're saying because it feels as though it's coming from a place of bias. Because you can make the same arguments you're making without making those distinctions and without separating groups and trying to profile groups.
Yeah, those groups were heavily polarized, and I would say my position is I don't think the Bundys are terrorists. I don't think that they're terrorists.
But I'm saying the way in which you presented the groups, it was hard not to feel as though there was an implicit bias. And for me, when I hear someone I feel is speaking from a place of bias, it makes me take their words with a lot more apprehension and a lot more doubt, because I'm not sure how far that bias goes. You know what I mean?
Very.
Biased against what? The federal government or the Bundys?
Bias in terms of the angle or perspective in which you analyze situations or information. It feels like the way you interpret things may be more narrow than what I'm comfortable accepting.
Yeah, I can see what you mean.
So, if your position is the Bundys aren't terrorists, wouldn't we say
Mhm.
that trying to enact political change through fear is close to the definition of terrorism? And it seems like by setting up and pointing guns at cops might be trying to enact political change through fear.
Yeah, that would fit both the UN and US definitions of terrorism.
So what is your definition of terrorism?
I don't really have a different definition of terrorism. My definition of terrorism is the same one that the Encyclopedia Britannica has, that basically it's the use of political violence in order to terrorize people into accepting or pushing a certain political agenda. It's using violence to put a political cause or aim on the map.
Okay, so is it that because because the Bundy side or the Patriot side didn't end up firing a shot, they weren't using violence?
No, it's not that. It's that because I'm not agreeing with them, but they were trying to basically they successfully stood up to the government. What happened in the Bundy standoff after the 10th of April 2014 was basically that the BLM recognized that, hey, we don't want this to turn out like these two dastardly events that happened in the early 90s, where there were standoffs, what with the Waco siege and Ruby Ridge in 1993 and 2 respectively. And basically they went south. It wasn't like Armed Patriots, but both of those went south. And pretty much it's Armed Patriots at Bunkerville that were all riled up there, that were at Bunkerville, that believe that both of those incidents and the BLM owning that excess of land, that huge excess of land, is government overreach. And I don't necessarily agree with. Yeah.
Oh, I agree with that. I do. I think that and here's sort of on feedback on the conversation. I would start with my encouragement to you would be, I would start with smaller points that are more agreeable. So just sort of to take the feedback I think Misag was giving was if you start off with this thing of using those kind of words that will excite our dissonance, that sort of patriots or progressive, where we start to go, oh, I think I might start to heal bias. That might start to raise our skeptical hackles, where we're like, hang on. And what I think we then start doing is going, hang on, is this bloke on my side or not? and we sort of put ourselves on a side. And what could work better is to start off with where you feel is like, I would say, shorter bits that make it clear, that are clear statements we'd all agree with. So to say, I think it's important that the government is fair and recognise the rights of citizens or something like that, and that kind of thing. We go, yeah, and then give a bit of the story, and then get to another conversation point, because if we listen too much without knowing which side we're on or able to interject, there's a chance that we're a little bit like switching off. Get what I mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
basically,
go on.
Yeah.
Go on.
Go ahead. Oh, so basically the Bundys and all of these, you could say militiamen, because after the Bundy standoff, a lot of right-wing militias were emboldened by them, and you can see why, because they were mostly these the right-wing patriots. They take a mostly libertarian, radical approach, and the whole Bundy standoff was basically a radical libertarian approach to standing up to the government, a lot of people would say. And I could see where they're coming from, and I'd agree with them.
Yeah.
And the whole, not only that, but on the other hand, with the Bundys, they say that they said that their approach to this was completely constitutional, and that they weren't anti-government. They weren't anti-government rebels. That they abided completely by the Constitution, and a lot of people rebuked that, saying that, hey, why the Bundy stand was unconstitutional. In one article in the Atlantic, and because of the Nevada Constitution, when Nevada attained statehood, it agreed to wholeheartedly give all of the land that was unappropriated to the federal government.
So,
and not only that, they would abide by
so
everything
just
in the
pause,
U.S. Constitution.
Just pause for us here. Misag, lay block, fire cubes, feedback.
This is an interesting one because I think the control was pretty decent. I had a really hard time following the argument, partially because there were a few minutes where I had to look away, but and then I kind of lost track of what was happening. Definitely hit a lot of different bases, you know. What I mean?
And that's the thing, kind of in conjunction with what I brought up earlier, with the concern, kind of putting yourself into a corner and allowing people to characterize you a certain way. What really gives people power in an argument is being able to give ideas and have people be curious as to where those ideas are coming from. And if you kind of paint yourself or characterize yourself, whether implicitly or explicitly, in ways that let people assume who you are, you're doing yourself a disservice. And that's kind of why I brought up the point of, making a distinction between progressives and Democrats. When you said it the way you said it, I immediately thought, okay, this guy has to be right-leaning or conservative. And I'm immediately making assumptions that I may not necessarily want to make, but that's just kind of the nature of how people react to the conversation. And that paired with kind of having this these statements that kind of come one after another without any clarifying means or any ability to really know what you're talking about, it just reinforces that assumption more and more.
I think that's a way to put it.
Yeah. Wait, could you repeat that last bit, Misag, or however you enunciate your name?
Misag, yeah. Sorry, I was kind of doing it a bit myself there. It's basically what I'm saying is, one, you should try to avoid putting yourself or others within groups, because really what is important are the ideas, and ideas do not necessarily fall cleanly within groups. So if you have a good idea, you do not need to characterize it. You just need to express the idea. So you don't need to put a label on who believes what you're saying or what you're expressing. You can just address the idea directly, because then people will know you're actually addressing that idea and not having bias towards a label or a group. And then if you continue kind of making point after point on top of doing that, it kind of reinforces assumptions someone might make about you. And they're now putting their bias onto you because you kind of open the door to that opportunity and to that situation.
Yeah, I think the
Oh,
way
yeah.
way I might put it is you will get a lot of ground. And this is a sort of general gist I feel for a lot of people. You get a lot of ground if they don't fully know where the argument's coming from yet. So if you take out that and you go, so one side's saying this and another side's saying that, and you haven't yet identified which side is which, you often find that you can smuggle ideas in through the back door, essentially, because people's skeptical hackles aren't up yet, and so we make assumptions, right? We go, I think this person's going to have this view on something, and if you talk about the view first and then the person who or the group who holds it, you might find that people go, oh, I'm not actually aligned with this. Like one of the interesting ones in Australia is our right-leaning group, our right-leaning political party is pro-migration, which to me makes sense in terms of labour markets and things like that, that the right is more migration because it means more profit and the left is more protectionist. But it's interesting because if you talk first about migration and then about the issues, people generally, myself included until just a few weeks ago, think, oh, yeah, right is anti-migrant, left is pro-migrant, because that's the way it is in the UK and the USA, and that's where we get a lot of our media. So I think that what you're saying by that, Misag, is like if you just go, here's these people and they think this thing, and here's these other people who think this thing, you might get appeal to their better nature before they realise that might disagree with their current view because their skeptical hackles aren't up yet.
Yeah, especially when because the way I see it, that situation is an extremely unique situation and it doesn't even necessarily need to be politicized. It's by itself kind of ridiculous. So you can express your ideas and how you kind of address that ridiculous situation without politicizing it, because especially with the nature of the world we have today, whether in the US or anywhere, because it's kind of a global thing, people are already polarized, and if you bring up those polarizing labels or those polarizing situations, it makes people a lot less willing to engage with you just due to the nature of that political environment. So if you can stay away from making it a political conversation, you can get a lot more people to truly understand your perspective because they're not associating it to a political label. They're just expressing or understanding your ideas as they are.
Excellent. Good chat.
Yes, and
Good.
yes, but the entire
Yes,
nature
but.
of the event was political.
Yeah.
It was an entirely political thing, and it not only is it politicized, it has heavy political implications.
Sure.
It had heavily to do with politics, and one thing that definitely has to do with politics in the White House. It was debated several times in the White House. This whole Bundy standoff, it was debated in the White House, but it didn't get a lot of attention from President Obama, except for when he signed 2 executive orders to use military force against the Bundys, which the executive orders I forgot their names of.
So it's okay. We'll pause here because it's more. This is a workshop. Is more about the sort of the practice of arguing than the content of the discussions, if that makes sense. So it's more about practicing the skill than fully exploring the position. So I think we'll wrap that one up there. What you do have the option.
Feel free to take it. Yeah, feel free to take it to the political religious channel if you want to continue this discussion, because there will be people who want to have that. It is a difficult thing to do. It is a difficult thing to do, to argue in this fashion. That's why we practice it.
Yeah.
I agree.
Excellent. Good stuff. So there was somebody who was saying they wanted to argue a different thing. I think we've only got time for one more. I had somebody who was saying capitalism. Well, we've got now Sea Salt saying capitalism is immoral. Well, that's an interesting, tricky one. An audience remotes has said something about ghosts. and how they relate to standards of evidence. Either of those, if they want to put their hand up, I will bring them in. And they can be our last
that one
one,
seems
whoever gets here
fun.
first. I've invited audience
The
remote, but they
spicy
haven't taken it. All right, sea salts. Looks like they've jumped on that opportunity.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize
Thank
you'd
you,
already
guys.
invited me. Oops, I think. Oops, sorry, sea
I like
salt.
you said capitalism as immoral, and then after that, education should be compulsory. I love that.
All right, so who should we take first? First, audience remote or sea salt? Audience remote. Your one was, remind me again. I've just read it out and then I forgot it.
Oh,
Ghost
well, I
and
had
celebrity.
I had an actual discussion with someone which got a bit heated in this very server.
Yeah, it was with snack debunks
Wait.
everything, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Was I there?
I don't know. I can't recall. So I actually wanted to take this particular argument here and see if we could workshop it so that there could be less of that animosity that we had.
Excellent. So what's the position how would you state your position then?
Yeah, so my position is that experience of the supernatural, specifically ghosts, is a valid and good enough for the average person to believe in ghosts. And I think the counter position is that we should only consider empirical standards of evidence.
Sure. Okay. So great. So you're saying when you say ghosts, what do you mean? What is a ghost?
Yeah, I don't know, right? And I don't think anybody could confidently say that they know. But what I do know is that I tend to trust, the vast majority of people have had a supernatural experience. I don't have any good reason to say that they haven't, right? Mm-hmm. You certainly can't disprove ghosts. Certainly. So we have this outstandingly high number of people who claim to have had a specifically supernatural experience. To simply dismiss them and say that they're all lying, they're all mistaken, I think would be, without any evidence other than to say, well, it's just not empirical enough for me, I think that's wrong.
Sure. So I read a book called Paranormality by Dr. Richard Wiseman, Professor Richard Wiseman, and he outlined in it quite a few examples. Like he's got a whole chapter devoted to ghosts where he said actually there are quite a few phenomena that a lot of people interpret as being ghosts. So the one that stood out to me was sleep paralysis. So people can wake up in the morning and be awake, but there's a certain part of their brain hasn't switched. I don't really know how it works. They experience for a few moments being unable to move, and it feels like a weight on their chest. And as a result, a lot of people, I think I had this once as a kid actually, a lot of people have a lifelike, semi-conscious experience of someone sitting on my chest. And a lot of people, if they're Christian,
also tend to hallucinate.
Yes, yeah. So
We're good.
Quite often we'll have what appears to be a lifelike hallucination of going, and if a Christian has it, they're like the Archangel Gabriel sat on my chest. So if some of the phenomena could be explained, would you still lean towards saying it's good enough evidence?
That's a fair point, actually. This is where standards of evidence, I think, get really called into question, right? For instance, if you had a sleep paralysis experience, and you said that you did, but there wasn't. This is a recent description of a psychological experience, right? This hasn't been around that long. So if you had that experience prior to its description, what would you be saying then? How do you account for the fact? I guess it's a sort of appeal to the fact that we don't want to necessarily say psychology and medicine know everything. At least that's my perspective, right? We don't want to appeal to that fact because why would we think we now know everything when we clearly didn't 50 years ago?
I think people have a really skewed view on empiricism a lot of the times, because realistically when people are speaking to empiricism, they're talking about measurable outcomes of scientific process. But what the scientific process doesn't do is disqualify based on no evidence. The scientific process takes what we can see and measure and what we can consistently see and measure, and we try to attribute reasonings or usefulness or understanding from those outcomes. So science has a limitation where if you don't have an ability to achieve that consistency, it's disregarded. And I think people mistake uh, the disregarding science gives with those situations with general disregarding and personal disregarding. You don't need to have everything be empirically backed. There is an amount of trust you can have with other people without needing, empiricism to be involved. And I think it's a huge gray area that I don't have an answer to either. It comes down to, credibility of the sources and general consistency, maybe not replicatable consistency, but some amount of consistency in the observation. And even then, it can be really hard to convince people of it that haven't had those experiences, because those tend to be very experience-based situations.
They do. I agree, and I.
Clarify,
Oh, okay.
are you asserting that the process of gaining empirical evidence is not against the idea of the supernatural existing in the way that was originally presented? Is that
I
what you
think
said?
so. I think so. I just think people take empiricism too far sometimes, and they don't really understand that science and empiricism is descriptive, not prescriptive. So you can't make
So let's throw back to
statement.
sea salt as well now.
So honestly, and you can't make prescriptions based on a lack of evidence. You can say it's not likely, but even the most fundamental laws we have, and obviously the definition of a theory in science is different than the colloquial definition, but the whole attitude towards it is this is the best understanding we have right now, not this is exactly how this works.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I'm not anti-science, and I want to just point out that, like,
I'm talking completely generally. This is just kind of a trend I see with people who are super.
Let's let sea salt respond.
Yeah, this is on the question of evidence and poltergeists. Yes.
Sorry, audience. Sorry, let's audience respond. I mean, get everyone names at the front.
I think I mean, in general, I don't think we have too strong of a disagreement here, right?
No,
we're talking about systems, different systems of approaching a person's barrier for belief, right? So somebody can say, I'll take empirical evidence for empirical claims, right? And obviously, I think, well, maybe not obviously, but you can come to a conclusion that maybe the supernatural is not an empirical claim by its very nature. So different systems might be warranted. If you build a machine to track ghosts and it happens to always go off when you see something that you might call a ghost, I mean, you have a good correlation there. It may not be empirically verifiable, but I'm not saying there are machines to track ghosts. I genuinely don't know. I've never looked into it, but but I think that there are systems and methodologies that are not empiricism, and I've heard, at least in certain discussions, people say, well, we'll only accept empirical data, we'll only accept forensic data. And don't get me wrong, those are great. I'm happy to have them. I'm glad we wouldn't have computers, we wouldn't have anything we have without that science. But if we use them as the strict measure for what someone believes, we're automatically taking away, even if you might find someone's belief absolutely ridiculous and the framework with which they hold it absolutely ridiculous, we're taking away so much potential, at the very least, just interesting beliefs. If
Can
not
I give
true.
a practical example to the limitation we're talking about?
Sure.
So DSM-5 is basically the psychiatric handbook in medicine, right? And when it comes to how they classify different mental illnesses and how they go about researching drugs and the effectiveness of drugs, the FDA will not approve drugs based on research that is not objective. So if you cannot consistently, measurably test an aspect of a mental illness, it is not approved for research, and they will not approve a drug that addresses it. As an example, ADHD has a lot of mood has a lot of aspects to it that involve mood. But how do you measure mood? How do you measure emotions? So a lot of those things are not actually represented in the DSM-5, which is the handbook on those mental illnesses. It's very limited. There's no literature on those aspects, even though it is widely known throughout those communities that it does affect those people with that ailment. So there are practical limitations even that are already present within our scientific systems and our medical systems.
That's a good example. Yeah, I hadn't even considered it from, an actual academic standpoint. I was really more thinking about systems of faith, whether they be ghosts, gods, whatever it is. These systems can address, like if somebody tells you that they, not to get personal, right? I don't want to get into anybody's religious life here, but if anybody tells you up front, hey, I prayed to God and he came to me and gave me a sign, and you said, well, is it a sign that I could see? And the person's, I'm totally sure, I just felt it. That's a system of belief, and you could even call it a methodology, right? Prayer to reach God is a methodology for achieving knowledge about something. I think you'll have a hard time convincing that person that their belief is so unjustified, or so because it lacks forensic or evidence in a lab, that they should just drop it. I think you'd be really alienating a person if you did that.
Yeah, you're sort of appealing to different standards. You're saying I've decided that your standards for deciding on what's true are wrong, not just the conclusions, and you'll break the discussion. Is kind of what you're saying. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, I think so. Anyway.
Yeah.
Excellent. So, I think it's time to wrap up here. I'm very sorry to Sea Salt Ice Cream, who I brought you up to the stage. I'm glad we got to.
It's all good. Thank you.
I'm glad we got to hear from you. Yeah, go on.
Someone was asking me if you had mentioned that you had a list of kind of the strategies and whatnot that you were marking down. So I wanted to ask about that. Who came in late?
Sure. So let me post in the chat now. These are sort of the rules of it. I've put the Twitch in there as well. I'll also share this link now for the Jamboard I've been working on, where I've been writing down a lot of the things people have been saying, the claims they've got. So if you see that bottom link that says Jamboard, you can pop in and see that I've been sort of keeping lists of what people have been saying. And there's a slide that says assonance and dissonance, where I was capturing some of those ones that are really effective phrases for creating that assonance I'm talking about. You sound smart. After that discussion, it got me thinking. I think we both agree on that's one that that you used something similar to that just now, audience, which was like you put it slightly differently. In general, I think we don't have too strong of a disagreement. I think that's good. It's close. I prefer the other way, which is sort of taking out the double negative and going, I think we agree. So yeah, you can use those as a gist. This is as a tool. What can I do to reduce dissonance to open people's ears? So I strongly encourage you all, give it a crack with your family. Go and have a disagreement with somebody. Could you pin these in the chat? Yeah, absolutely. I will next time. What we're going to do now, though, is wrap up the event. I'll get some last thoughts from the panel we've had up here. Thank you very much for stepping up. And then we'll look at running another one again soon. I'm still learning how to moderate these and what best to do. So I'll also, if you want to post any feedback or anything like that, I know Magnus has given me some feedback in a DM, which I really appreciate. I think he's given some really useful feedback there.
Yeah, I would like to say something.
Sure, go for it.
So yeah, I've been here since the beginning, obviously quiet because I was here just to moderate, and I gotta say you're an absolute beast, man. Like you did not need anybody's help during the entire thing, so props for that.
Oh, thank you very much.
That's why they put me on the job when I'm not even staff yet.
What they were just like, we don't need a proper mod in here because we think eggshells will handle it.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah, pretty much. You're a beast.
This stuff is really interesting, and I think it's super helpful. Like, people actually listen to it because it's interesting, not because they want to troll it. And I kind of noticed that it's good stuff.
These are one of my favorite kinds of conversations, and when I try to kind of bring up these strategies, in the moment, people just say, you know, stop bringing up meta. But I think there's a lot of value in knowing how arguments are structured and conversations are structured, so you can kind of know what can be looked towards for value and kind of what to avoid.
Yeah, and that's the gist of it. Yeah, let's sort of how can we use these strategies in a fun way where we know we're doing it in a workshop, so that we can sort of try it on for size, so that next time you need to sort of go into bat and disagree with your boss or something like that, you can go, okay, practice a thing, use yes and. It's a fun thing. So yeah, if you're interested in these kind of discussions, there's lots of other ones on the Chatterbox server. You can join that. I've also got my link above on YouTube and Twitch, where I'm planning on starting to stream, where I go and practice using these skills, talking to sort of flat earthers or very people who hold other views very strongly, be it Christian presuppositionalists or people who hold political views. Because I'm still working on this myself. I've got to be honest. I've spent years trying to practice and learn these skills, and I still find myself from time to time being like, oh, come on, that's ridiculous. And being like, come on, Harry, that doesn't work. So yeah, it's a good fun thing to practice.
Absolutely. It's super helpful stuff, and it's like a good step in, you know, arguing more effectively with other tools too, because, you know, this is just one of the ways you can make yourself way better. There's the idea of street epistemology. There's a whole server for that, and we do it here too. Great stuff on making sure you understand the other person's point before you even start. Huge, yeah, a lot of that.
Yeah, where's actually the street epistemology link? I'm going to share that actually now in the chat right before we shut it down, because that
Are you going to be able to without it muting you?
Oh, it's going to mute me. Yep. Yeah, if somebody else could share that one for the street epistemology one, I think is starting again tomorrow. A lot of similar techniques and questions in there, where it was sort of developed by a chap called Anthony Magnabosco. Now there's a whole community of people who do it, which is essentially, how can I challenge people's beliefs in a way that they will willingly engage in a conversation, because I'm going to sort of just ask them questions rather than challenge or criticize or disagree. Yeah, so thank you all.
For those of you who found this on those of you who found this on Stage Discovery, please remember to join the server and check out. We do this all the time. We do other kinds of events as well. Really fun stuff. Very good discussion. Very often. You'd like it if you liked what happened today.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you all very much for your time. I think we're going to close things down now, if I can leave the mods to do that. And yeah, everybody can go over. That's the other thing we should say. If people want to have those discussions, those political ones or anything like that, should we encourage that they drop into one of the VCs, maybe the political VC here, or Chill VC?
Yeah, we usually go to Chill VC after these events, because after the event, it kind of just becomes post-event VC. So that, you know, that's kind of where everyone usually floods. Feel free to go in there, continue your conversations, keep this up, and, you know, keep talking good stuff.
Tabs versus
Appreciate it.
All right, I'm gonna shut the event down in a second. Yeah, as Block just said, anybody who wants to continue this can just go to Chill VC. That's usually the post-event voice chat for anybody wanting to say, no matter what, absolutely anything that you felt like should have been said or should have been asked in the event, you can ask in Chill VC. All right, guys.
See y'all later.
See you in Chill VC in 3, 2, 1.
Fantastic. All right, that was good fun. I've got some really good feedback actually from Magnus while we're doing this. I'm just trying to give you constructive criticism. I think the former event was better where you were running it, in quotes. It's your show. It can be a good experiment to compare to the last one. Focus on the aspect of it being a practice session, get people debating and try to get as many butts as possible. That was the most fun part of it for me, seeing people changing their argument. You're absolutely right. I think I need to get a bit more heavy-handed or hands-on with the moderation and probably set that up as a part of the discussion, which is like, I'm the moderator here, I'm the sort of running the workshop, so I'm going to jump in and change your argument, and we're going to focus on trying to get more butts in the discussion. Even if I maybe invite people to sort of quote unquote make a mistake, as one of them, I think Misag, it might have been, was like, yeah, I did that one on purpose to see if you'd catch it. I think that can be fun, just so we're listening out for it, and because it's not just about do Do you hear yourself say it, which is a huge part of learning this as a technique? It's also just experiencing what it's like when somebody says, yeah, I agree with you, but on the other hand, something else. And the difference between that and somebody going, yeah, I agree with you, and this is what makes your view so right, and here's why this also thing could also be true. You get that experience of like, yeah, I can feel that feels different when I hear somebody speak in that way. So still really learning how to run these as a session. My goal is that I will start running these almost professionally. I'm still not sure how that's going to work, and that's why I think Chatterbox is great, because they offer to run the event. They have mods turn up and help me with all of that. We get an audience, and I can learn those skills because I'm still, I've been running this live in the room for ages. That's a day-long, sometimes 3-day-long workshop that are sometimes. So if I speak up, it's clear that we're doing this in a feedback format and I'm moderating a discussion. Whereas in this format, I need to relearn that skill on how can I do that, particularly in a 2-hour session. Where also the other thing I'm learning is people might have just dropped in 2 minutes ago, so I got to keep restating the tools. Lots to learn in that. Really enjoy it. So if this kind of discussion is something you enjoy, make sure you subscribe. I see that 2 people have subscribed to me, which is really awesome. Thank you very much, Boomy Bean and Angela, and oh my goodness, more people. Mark, Derek, Biohazard, Moonhill. That's really lovely. Thank you very much. So I'm going to make a commitment to keep doing these so I can keep honing my skill, but so you've got something to watch if you like these kind of discussions. I do think that's some really useful things for me to work on. I also welcome your feedback. So if you want to drop a comment saying, here's what I think could work better, or this bit sucked, I don't mind. You don't have to use the skills. I'm robust. I can handle a bit of criticism. Thank you all very much for joining, and I better get on and do some